I'm standing on top of an aerobic septic tank at a septic tank manufacturing facility to show you guys from the inside how these systems work. What's going on, guys? Luke here with Luna Environmental, and yes, behind me is a full-blown aerobic septic system that just got manufactured and it has not been installed underground yet. Now, this system is separated into 4 chambers, and to make it really simple, over here is what we call the pre-treatment tank. This is what receives everything from the house. So we start with nasty sewage wastewater here, and as we move from compartment to compartment, it begins to get cleaner and cleaner until we land here, and it gets pumped out into the environment. Now, this first chamber that I'm standing over is called the pre-treatment tank, or the primary tank. It's called the primary tank because this is where everything from the house comes. So some technicians call this a trash tank because essentially inside we have a scum layer that builds up at the top where things that float to the top: oils, fats, grease, soaps. Down at the bottom, all of those solids begin to fall, and as they fall and settle at the bottom, the middle area is where our wastewater begins to build up, truly kind of a liquid layer. In the septic world, we call it effluent. And essentially what we want is for that middle liquid layer to make its way up this T-shaped PVC and to pour into the next chamber called the aeration tank. Now, it really is amazing how simple an aerobic system is, because what you'll notice about that inlet T-shaped PVC is that it's actually measured to push through that top scum layer such that the only thing that rises and therefore pours into that second tank is going to be the effluent, the wastewater. So it pushes through the sludge, but not so far that it touches the solids at the bottom. It's positioned to allow the water to move and let everything else stay and continue to break down before it moves into any other part of the system. Now let's move to the second tank, the aeration chamber. Inside the aeration chamber, this is where we're piping some PVC all the way down to the bottom with some air diffusers at the bottom that actually allow air to be pumped into this part of the chamber so that we can introduce oxygen and aerobic bacteria start to feed on all of the waste and the solids, thus breaking them down in this tank. And if you take one of the riser lids off, you're going to look down into this tank and you're going to see a bunch of water, and it looks like a jacuzzi with bubbles being pumped in. And the reason for that is not because the air helps to move things and therefore break it down, but the introduction of oxygen actually brings in those aerobic bacteria that then start to naturally filter and clean the water. One of our technicians at Luna says there is no greater filter or filtration system than Mother Nature. And that's why we're putting oxygen here, because we want that aerobic bacteria to start to break it down. And the introduction of air, the introduction of oxygen actually helps to dampen the smell over time as well. The separating wall between the aeration chamber and the third tank, the clarifying tank, actually doesn't go all the way down. In other words, there's an opening at the bottom where the wastewater from the aeration tank can actually move into the clarifier tank from below. It doesn't have to be piped in. It doesn't have to rise to a certain level. It's going to be pushed into the clarifier tank naturally all the way at the bottom, because that wall does not go all the way to the floor of the tank. Now you can see here the aeration tank and the dividing wall that separates the aeration from what we call the clarifying chamber. Now, if you look closely at the clarifier chamber, you'll see that the bottom actually has a sloped floor. It can be difficult to see in the shadow, but that sloped floor is essentially what allows solids that make it through underground under this wall into the clarifier tank to fall to the bottom, be sloped this way, and therefore end up back in the aeration chamber to continue to break down before they move here. The only thing we want getting through from the clarifier chamber to the pump tank are pure liquids. Now, an interesting thing happens to the wastewater and to the sludge between the aeration chamber and the clarifier tank. Here, we're introducing oxygen. Here, we're allowing that broken down wastewater to rise and solids to fall back in so they continue to break down, so that when we get to the pump tank, the only thing being pumped out is actual liquid wastewater. It's actual effluent. But as you have a little aerobic bacteria ecosystem building up in the aeration chamber and some solids, some sludge coming under the wall into the clarifier tank and then therefore falling back into the aeration chamber, or the sludge that's being broken down by that ecosystem of aerobic bacteria is called activated sludge. It creates this little vicious cycle of more bacteria being formed, more bacteria feeding, more bacteria replicating, more bacteria feeding, and ultimately you're building this natural ecosystem of filtration as that activated sludge that has been activated by the aerobic bacteria continues to replicate and therefore bring more bacteria and therefore break things down more and more efficiently. And that's part of what makes these aerobic systems so effective at cleaning wastewater. Now, finally, the last chamber of the aerobic septic system is the pump tank. And it's called the pump tank because this is where the cleanest treated water exists to be pumped out through exactly what it sounds like, an actual pump into the environment. Now remember, from the clarifier chamber, essentially we have the same PVC inlet that allows water to rise and therefore spill over into the pump tank. This is the only way for water or the effluent to actually get into the pump tank ultimately. It has to come through this hole, through that T-shaped PVC inlet. Now here's how the discharge of the water actually works. Inside of this pump tank, we have a pump going all the way down with 3 small pump floats wrapped around the bottom end of that pump. They're stacked on top of each other. And as you can imagine, as the water begins to rise, those pump floats begin to rise with the water. As those pump floats rise, they trigger the system to turn the pump on and actually start pushing out that water. And of course, as the water is pumped out into the environment, causing the water levels to go back down, those pump floats go back down as well, triggering the pump to turn off. So that's it. That is how these aerobic septic systems work from the inside out, taking an insider look. And in the great state of Texas, it turns out maintenance is actually not optional. It's required by law because we want to make sure that all of that effluent, that discharged water going out into the environment is safe. And the only way to make sure that it is safe is to put a little bit of regulation around making sure things get inspected and we can confirm it is indeed safe. If you got some value from this video, seeing aerobic systems from the inside, hit the share button and send it to your best friend who you know is going to get some valuable content from this as well. And from Luke here at Luna Environmental, I'll see you guys in the next video.